Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and as a return guest, we have Dr. Andre Morgan, the school department's, school district's Director of Opportunity, Access, and Equity. Welcome to the show again.
George, many thanks, and I trust you're doing well today. It's great to come back to the show to further discuss the district's lens on opportunity, access, and equity.
Yeah, it's since we last talked, I guess we ended up the last show with a translation for us civilians of what equity really comes down to. And I guess you used the analogy of two kids in the play yard talking about things that are fair and unfair. So is that what equity really is now interpreted as, or what's there a better interpretation?
All right, so, building on that point, in that conversation, my parting comment led to this idea of fairness. And I gave an example of two students on a playground. One is on the swing and the other is waiting for a turn on the swing. But the student on the swing does not want to give the other student a turn, and that student replies, "That's not fair." And it's that idea of fairness in which the district wants to ensure that we stand up in the district and build programs and policies that are based on this value. But I think the question of the hour is, what is fair? Yeah. And many might define fair as treating everyone the same, but I would actually push on that a little bit and saying that doing so is the most unfair way to treat students. So will you let me elaborate for a minute?
You're on the roll.
All right, wonderful. To young children, running a race on the school playground, fair simply means starting at the same place. And it's when students leave the race on the playground and enter the metaphorical race on academic achievement that the difference between fair treatment and equal treatment becomes crucial. So in the race to education, fair is sometimes not equal. Treating students equally means that all students receive the same treatment regardless of their needs. For example, a student who is a native English speaker has access to the exact same materials, resources, instruction, and supports that are available to an emerging bilingual student, or a student who has a solid foundation in math that was attained through consistent quality Tier 1 math instruction and home support receives the exact same instruction as a student who's had gaps in their learning due to high mobility. So equal treatment only works if the children are starting from the same place.
So you're really talking about a tailoring of the education system to really meet the kid at the door where he really is, or she really is, and bring them along to hopefully everybody gets to the same place when the show's over.
Right, absolutely. And equity means giving each student what he or she needs to be successful.
Well, one of the things that popped out me since we last talked, I dug into the equity report that you guys put out. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, it's available on the website of the school department, and it comes in two forms. You can get a long text version that'll cure your insomnia, and then you can get the shorter version, which is the slide deck, and that gives you a good, quick idea of what's really going on. So anyway, looking at this study, one of the things I think that popped out of me is English language learners, essentially kids that don't start with a native understanding of English, and former English language learners, which I didn't realize was a category. They still seem to have a problem not achieving the same level of participation in advanced placement, which I guess is the standard you're looking at is, are we doing well? Is how many kids take advanced placement? So is that a fair assessment of what part of the situation is?
Well, I think as we're talking about subgroups of students, if you will, let me go back to this idea and reiterate that the reality is that treating students equally can only be fair if all students begin at the same starting point
Yeah.
and can achieve success with the exact same opportunities, treatment, access, and resources. So our goal as a district is to help each of our students, including those students who are speaking English as a second language or who have disabilities of some sort. Yes, meeting them where they are and making sure that they have the access and the opportunities to be successful and to reach the K through 12 finish line of being college, career, and life ready.
Yeah, so I guess, again, sticking with the English language learners as a group, it seems to be one of the major challenges for at least that subgroup is to how can they get much out of the class if they're still struggling with English and trying to understand it. And the reason I focus on it is one of my high school associates and also went to the same college I did, was a displaced person from World War II. And as his family got pushed across Europe, he picked up 5 languages. So he was fluent in 5 languages. But he got into a situation where when he was in a class and the professor would say something in English, he would start translating back through each one of these languages till he gets back to his native language. And when he gets there, he wasn't in that country long enough to pick up the sophisticated words for the translation. And he was kind of lost at it. And I can imagine that this would be happening also. Got into a discussion with one of the guys at the Y, who's a recent immigrant to this country. And he said his major breakthrough was when he started dreaming in English as a level of achievement that he's starting to think in English. So I guess, what's the school system doing in order to get kids to learn and think in English? What more can we be doing? Because it's apparently not the high point of the program.
So I guess one way of answering that is to really kind of share, George, what educational equity in the classroom could mean to these groups of students in particular. So it means that the student who is a native English speaker has access to the core materials, resources, and instruction, while the emerging bilingual student has access to culturally and linguistically responsive materials and supports that are taught by appropriately certified teachers who learn about their students' diverse education needs. And it means that the student who has gaps in the conceptual math knowledge has additional resources, supports, and instruction in order to provide the student with opportunities for grade level success. And so we're not talking about equity for all students as lip service, but we're talking about how do we reach all students. And every student learns differently, and every student comes with his or her own set of strengths and challenges. Yeah. How do we tap in to meet those challenges so that we can help close the achievement gaps that are pervasive in our education system?
So is this what special ed is doing? Or is this a different program?
Well, it's a partnership. It's a partnership with special ed, and so part of our focus on opportunity, access, and equity is to ensure that all students who may have been marginalized at some point get their needs addressed. Special ed is identifying those learning needs, and so it's a partnership to make sure that none of our students fall through the cracks, and that again, that we're really helping students, each student, regardless of their background, their experience, their race, their language difference, their disability, learning-wise, that every student can reach the K through 12 finish line.
Well, that gets, I guess, to the heart of the situation of how well tailored can you make a classroom? If you got, I don't know, what's a typical classroom, 25 students?
And it varies, but yeah, give or take about 20 to 25
students. You got 20 to 25, essentially different individuals, different background, and you're trying to all get them to the same point by the end of the year. And this goes on 12 years in a row, or 13 years in a row if you start with kindergarten. And the thing I'm trying to get my hands around is how can you tailor a classroom to half a dozen different kids who are not the standard model, if you will. They come with different assets and different backgrounds. So,
I'm actually going to give 7 strategies to answer that question. But before I give those, if I can make this point, I think the difference between treating students fairly and treating them equally, because that's where I started in the conversation, is a really powerful difference. And so the opportunities that we provide students really reflect the value that we place on fairness, on justice, and really individuals getting what they need and deserve in order to reach their fullest potential. That said, the reality is that students rarely begin the race to education at the same starting point, which I think is one of the points that you just made a few seconds ago. And really in order to change the inequities created as a result of societal and institutional challenges, we really have to put the needs of underrepresented students and their families first. And so as educators, we're tasked to provide access, representation, and meaningful participation for all. So to your more direct question, how do we shape this and what does this look like in a classroom setting? I think this is how you can put this concept into practice. And it starts with the question, does treating students fairly take more time? And I would say not nearly as much as unsuccessful solutions to behavioral problems that continue to eat up classroom time in 5 to 15-minute chunks over the course of a given year. So here are 7 strategies that could be helpful and address the question that you just asked. Number 1, everyone has the same rules. And so exceptions may be made for unusual circumstances, but positive social interaction is pretty much the same for everyone. I think number 2, consequences have to be flexible. So when a rule is violated, for example, the teacher can choose from a large set of possible consequences. These consequences work best when spelled out in advance to students, administrators, and even parents. There's no defined order or progression. Faculty can choose one that works best or the one that they think will be effective from their knowledge of the student. Hence, the reason why relationships become important in terms of the equity piece. And often it's very effective to give a student a choice from a list with a promise to improve or the possibility of losing the privilege of choosing. I think number 3 is the understanding that equal isn't always fair, and to be able to express that. Using progressive consequences does not mean that you are treating students the same. How many times a student is run through the progression depends on who's caught and how the consequence is delivered. So let's look at an example for a second. And this is a highly exaggerated example, but even when a teacher is more subtle, students pick up on it. George, please stop interrupting. This is your warning. Thank you. As opposed to, George, you weasel, how many times do I have to tell you not to interrupt? I'm really tired of it. You get one more warning before I do something far more serious. Now, in both circumstances, students were treated equally because they both got a warning, but was it fair?
I would think which one is going to be effective as opposed to fairness. I mean, if you jump down the student's throat with a harsh comment, you're going to get a reaction that is probably just as harsh as opposed to, I've been screwing up all morning. It's about time I settle down, which is really what the teacher wants to get to.
Yeah, you're right. And based on how a student perceives it is going to determine their reaction.
Yeah. And I think that's part of teacher ed. How do you deal with different students under different situations? Mm-hmm. As opposed to just learning, hey, I'm going to teach math, so I studied a lot of math.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I want to throw in real quick the remaining 4 items or strategies that, are impactful to the question that you asked. When you have students with different needs, how do you decipher and teach this concept of fair versus equal. And I think the fourth element is really to teach that concept of fair versus equal to your class before you actually implement it. So with homework, class discussion, or even an in-class activity, for example, it's been beneficial in my experience that you ask students for examples from their home, their school, or their community, where is it fair and good, and where people are treated differently. And think of a few examples of how you might intend to be fair in the classroom. And then I really believe that students in grades K through 12 can understand and accept this when it's explained in a way that matches their capabilities. I think the fifth strategy is to follow the basic tenements of great discipline, keeping communication between you and the student who violated a practice or a rule private unless it's impossible to do so. I think number 6, be willing to discuss a strategy with students so that when students complain that something is not fair, if their consequence is different from another student's, reminding them that fair isn't equal, and talking about others isn't applicable in the context of that class, and adding that you will not talk about that individual student to others on that same regard. And asking students what would be fair. And, when students answer, follow with words or phrases like, okay, if you can guarantee that when I follow your suggestion, you'll stop or start doing this behavior. And if your idea works, that will be great. But if it doesn't, then we'll do it my way. And this gives students the responsibility to change while understanding what is at stake. And this is even applicable for students who have a learning disability or who don't speak English as a primary language. And then I think the 7th issue is being willing to discuss the strategy with parents. If a parent complains about unfairness or that you dislike their student, trying a conversation that includes the following points I have found to be really impactful. I'm really glad you're here. It's great to work with caring parents who have the same goal as me to help your student improve. Or I'd like to hear about your ideas regarding this situation. You know your student better than I do, so please tell me what works at home. And this is usually a great equalizer question. Or something like, I can see why you might be concerned, but together we can make things better for your student. So just a few strategies, because being truly fair is harder and requires more work in the short run than just treating everybody the same. And in the long run, it saves more time and it's a little more effective. And when it comes to treating everybody the same, every student deserves a lot better than that.
I think one of the things that just popped into my mind while you were rattling off your 7 strategies, when you get into your strategy number 6, you're really talking about getting the students to buy into the goal of the year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm teaching math, and by the end of the year, this is what you're going to be able to do. And to get there from here is going to require certain things. And you get to be kind of explicit as to what has to happen between now and then. And I think what you're saying is that if you get the students to buy into the ultimate goal of the year, then it's a lot easier to convince them that, hey, whatever you're doing isn't getting us to where we want to be by June or something like that. So it's more of the approach of students, they're part of your learning process opposed to being just victims of a classroom presentation, stand and deliver concept.
Yeah, indeed. And I found that the more that we're communicators with students and families, the better the learning outcomes are.
And I think most parents want their kids to succeed. And they're not there to just harass the teacher or the system, but they want the best for their kid. And I think one of the issues you're almost alluding to, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, that parents come in and want special treatment. And I've heard this before, that parents want to get their kids an IEP, individual education plan, because they think that if they get their kid an IEP, then they're going to get special treatment and something better than the average. And I think this is probably one of the issues where the parents have to get into the game of buying into what are we going to do this year? How are we going to get there from here?
It really is. And it's also an extension of that as well. It's how we want to partner together to make sure that we have the type of program that's not just meeting your students' needs, but one that has the type of interventions and supports that your student needs in order to be to reach that K through 12 milestone, if you will. So it's not a kind of a skate over the river program, if you will, but it's how do we individualize instruction, and how do we, really attribute to this idea of fairness that we're talking about that's going to make a difference in your students' academic life while here with the district, and even beyond when he or she leaves the district.
Well, I think that's part of what the teacher's job is, to recognize where each kid is coming from. And what do you have to say to this individual student to get the message across? And the same message doesn't work for everybody. They don't perceive it the same way. And I think if we're getting back to the point of you have to accept the students, from where they are, not where you would like them to be. And even with a class of only 20, there's a lot of variation student to student without getting into English as a second language or economic background.
And I will share from my personal experience, George, that when I was a teacher, one of the things that I found that was productive in my classroom was really building relationships. And we undervalue that term, and it's really become a buzzword, building relationships with students. But building relationships is a lot more than just, hi, tell me about yourself and your background and your goals and your interests. But what it's about is getting to know students so that you know how to tailor messages differently. Because you're right, and then in any given classroom, students process messages very differently. And so the challenge that the teacher has is to be able to do rotating hats in the classroom and to be able to levy messages in a different way that's going to hit hopefully all, but most of the students in a way that's going to engage them, excite them, and then move them towards where you want them to be. And so I found that really understanding the backdrops and something about students allowed me to script the message in a way that got students more engaged. And when I got students more engaged, I had less behavioral problems that I dealt with in the classroom, which didn't take up valuable class time dealing with discipline issues, but that everybody was on a learning pathway. And I think that that's the goal. Both in the opportunities that we offer and trying to be fair, but making sure that when students leave the school district at the end of their time, that not only are they going to use their foundation, if you will, to do some great things in their lives, but that they're going to move on into a pathway that's going to allow them to be a change agent. And again, part of that, K through 12, baseline is to make them college, trade school, and or work ready.
And I think that's one of the problems that the school district at this level has is at one time, a high school education was something spectacular. And that was enough to handle most of life's problems. And as technology advanced, and all of a sudden, you got to know a little bit more, which brought on the concept of trade schools, folk schools, whatever you want to call them. And at the same time, some sort of post-secondary education, whether it's a junior college or college or university, or as you've achieved, a couple of doctorate degrees. And this transition, I think, has left a lot of people somewhat confused as what's the right goal from secondary education? Is it to put some kid on the street ready to earn a living? Or is it to put some kid on the campus of some university or advanced junior college? And there's a lot of emphasis right now on junior colleges that have more of a technology background than previous, but that's another story.
Well, but you bring up an interesting point, because many jobs now require specialized training in technology. The bachelor's programs are usually too broad to address, leading towards a more vocational education program after the completion of even a college degree.
Yeah.
In the shift in the job and education markets, I think become a real consideration in this day and time, because there are many families who may feel unsure about the career paths that their children choose to pursue, and a lack of knowledge and misconceptions about trades can really lead parents and even teachers to steer students away from these programs, when vocational training might be a surer path to a more enjoyable and stable job. For example, I have a friend who was the first in her family to attend college. And, she went as far as a master's degree in education. And her husband is a first generation college graduate as well. But he first went to trade school and then later decided to strengthen his resume following the recession. And so he began his bachelor's degree, and it took a few years for him to finish. But now they have a student who's getting ready to graduate from high school. And they're pushing a college education because that's been their experience.
Yeah.
But their student, is championing vocational school beyond high school. And so the idea that their son might not attend a traditional college is really a stress point for both of them.
Yeah.
And, one of them said vocational schools where we grew up seem to be reserved for people who weren't making it in real school. So we weren't completely sure.
That I think that's one of my hot buttons, as you probably recognize. And unfortunately, or fortunately for you, we're down to the last few minutes. So again, Dr. Morgan, thank you very much for joining us. And I think we need to talk some more, because this is an area I'd really love to get into, about the vocational school and that whole path. And you talk about first-time graduate school, college. That's me. So thanks you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. And again, as I mentioned in most of these shows, my email address shows up in the credits. You got some comments, you want to appear, you want to suggest something, please do. I'm looking forward to any kind of comments you have. And thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, Dr. Morgan. And
Well, thank you for having me.
We'll have to do this some more.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.